All right. For this next session, it's called Minimize the Benefits of Cloud Computing, Maximize the Benefits of Cloud Computing, and Minimize the Security Risks. We're trying to avoid the other way around. So anyway, cloud computing is all the buzz these days, and it promises to facilitate the exchange of patient information and provide IT services at lower costs and faster speeds. Of course, these opportunities come with potential security risks, and some of those risks and how they've been overcome are what our panelists will discuss today. Our moderator is Adam Green. Adam is the partner of the law offices of Davis, Wright, and Tremaine. He's also chairman of the HIMSS Cloud Security Workforce. Jennings Aske, the CISO of Partners Healthcare, is back today. I think you heard him at our final session yesterday. And we also have Darren Lacey. Darren is the CISO and Director of IT Compliance for Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Medicine. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. So I think that's what they call a Freudian slip. I think there probably has been a lot of minimizing the benefits of cloud computing services in the world of healthcare. So hopefully we can address that today and look at whether there's a future of improving that. So I know HIMSS at the annual conference asked for conflict of interest disclosures. So I will say I do represent some cloud providers, so just take that for whatever it's worth. But I will try to be as objective as possible during the course of this. So raise your hand if you've heard cloud computing can potentially save you some money. Is that news to anyone, or has everyone heard that at one point or another? So I don't think we need to spend 20 minutes talking about the wonders of cloud computing services and the potential benefits there. I thought this quote did a pretty good job of encapsulating that. So I try not to read off slides too much, but humor me on this one. Our analysis implies that over a 13-year life cycle, the cost of implementing and sustaining a cloud environment may be as much as 2/3 lower than maintaining a traditional non-virtualized IT data center. And that comes from The Economics of Cloud Computing, Booz Allen Hamilton, December 2010. Now, I didn't do a meta search. I didn't try to, well, this guy says it's 1/3, this guy says 2/3. I don't know the validity of this versus other statistics, but I think, there's general consensus that when properly deployed, cloud computing services potentially lower costs. But at what cost? And that's why we're here today, is because healthcare, there has been a large resistance to moving to the cloud because of, I think, primarily, I would guess this is certainly in the top 3 reasons, if not the top reason for resistance, security concerns, including compliance with security requirements. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes laying the HIPAA landscape here before we go into a strictly Q&A discussion from 2 people whose experiences I think are much more informative than mine. So I'll lay the framework and then we'll just hear from the experts on this. So first, HIPAA has the concept of a business associate, which has a very long definition in it. What I've put up here is a shorthand of that definition for purposes of one of the essential questions, which if you talk to 2 people, especially depending on who employs those 2 people, you may get widely different answers. So is a cloud computing provider a business associate? So in shorthand, a business associate is a person who, on behalf of a covered entity, performs a function or activity involving the use or disclosure of individually identifiable health information. So we've seen in healthcare, cloud providers take different approaches here. Some have recognized that they're a business associate. Others point to potential ambiguity, issues like that there's a conduit exception to the definition of business associate that talks about, for example, when you hand something over to FedEx, they're a conduit, and they're not your business associate. They're not acting on your behalf. That's what the guidance specifically talks about. And then it does go further and say, and their electronic equivalents, like, for example, internet service providers. And so there's been some confusion out there as to whether cloud providers may potentially fall under this conduit exception. And at least with respect to software as a service providers, I think we saw guidance in the form of a $100,000 settlement agreement making pretty clear that for email providers, for online calendar providers, so for those types of software as a service providers, there needs to be a business associate agreement in place. So OCR has done a shot across the bow, an expensive one for one particular physician practice, stating that at least in the area of software as a service providers, yes, you are a business associate. But they haven't made it as clear with respect to the other types of cloud providers. So infrastructure as a service providers or platform as a service providers. And you do have some ambiguity in this area. You have questions as to if we're basically just giving you a place to put information and we have no idea what you're doing with it and you put it on there, are we using or disclosing information on your behalf? And some people say yes, some people say no. So there's some ambiguity there. There's actually a letter dating back to 2003 where OCR sent out a letter to a public storage company and said, in response to their question, and said, a public storage company that just receives protected health information in sealed boxes and doesn't have any use or disclosure of that information other than if a box breaks and they have to fix it, is not a business associate. So some people have said, well, maybe that means that if you're just providing the electronic equivalent of storage and you're not doing anything with it, then you're not a business associate. And others have said, no, I think that's a different creature entirely. Others have said, well, maybe it's if it's encrypted, then you're kind of like, you've got those sealed boxes and not. So there's still some ambiguity. Healthcare providers, it's going to depend on their risk profile as to how much they want to buy into a particular argument or not. But there's nothing out there that definitively says all cloud providers are business associates. We may see in a final rule something that says exactly that. We may not. But until then, I think there's still people who will continue to make arguments that they're not, and there's others who will say vehemently that they are. So as I mentioned, HHS has reached a settlement stating that at least with software as a service providers, at least in the area of online calendars and email, that yes, you need a business associate agreement if you're going to be storing protected health information with them. And then some cloud providers, whether it be related to this or unrelated, have started entering into business associate agreements. And so we'll hear in the Q&A the issues surrounding getting a cloud provider to enter into a BA agreement, but some definitely are and some continue to resist it. And then I think one important thing to keep in mind under HIPAA is, I love when someone puts themselves out as HIPAA compliant and suggests if you use our service, you are HIPAA compliant. And it's important to understand they may be a business associate and they may need to be HIPAA compliant themselves, but no third party can ever make you, if you're a covered entity, HIPAA compliant. They can provide you hardware, software that may assist you, but there's always going to be something that falls on the covered entity. So there's no plug and play, if you will. I plug this solution in and I don't have to worry about HIPAA. And so you have things like there may have to be two different risk assessments. You may have to have the cloud provider, who's a business associate potentially, depending on who you ask, having to do their own risk assessment. And then the healthcare provider has to look at their risks, because you could have the best cloud solution in the world, but if on your side of the fence, everyone's just downloading from the cloud onto unsecure end user devices or keeping terrible passwords, then you still have the risk despite the best security they have there. So it's important to understand that their HIPAA compliance does not, for cloud providers, does not end the story. It's just part of the story. So I'm just going to throw out a few resources that are available. HIMSS has put out a cloud security toolkit. The link is up here, and that includes a cloud computing definitions and background, so some background materials in general, Cloud Security 101, top 10 cloud security concerns, so sort of 10 overarching issues to be concerned about in healthcare when using a cloud provider, and then questions to ask, so it maps to those 10 big questions, but goes into a large number of questions from there, and a white paper, Navigating HIPAA While Moving to the Cloud, that kind of walks through what steps need to be taken to comply with HIPAA when moving to the cloud. So we do have those resources available. So with that, let me turn it over to the Q&A portion. And so I thought it'd be best to just go straight into questions. We thought it'd be best, instead of doing additional presentations, we'll just get to the heart of the matter. So let me first ask this question of Jennings, and then Darren can answer after that. But what are the two most challenging issues that you face with cloud computing with respect to information security in your organization? So what have been the top two challenges?
Long story short, as much as I've said that, we haven't really figured out a way to move things forward for a couple of reasons. One, the BA issue. When we do talk about the cloud, I recognize there's all these different parts of the technology stack that are in the cloud. And one area where we were pretty close to picking a cloud vendor was trying to solve our Dropbox problem. And we have people wanting to use services like Dropbox, and they put that on their device, and obviously that's an issue. And the vendor we selected, which seemed to be very good from an overall security perspective, refused to sign a BA. And that was a deal breaker in light of the HHS settlement that you referenced. So the BA issue is one issue. And then the second thing is just in terms of looking at cloud vendors, there's this need to really perform some level of due diligence and to look at how they secure their environment. And so the second problem really is the kind of lack of transparency around the controls and how they secure it. We've tried to evaluate vendors using the NIST 853 series as kind of a baseline for evaluating the vendors, and try to be very flexible and to say, tell us how you meet these standards, not even being very prescriptive in terms of saying you need to use X as your change management process. And at the end of the day, a lot of the vendors just simply aren't transparent. And that to me is like the other second primary hurdle.
What about you, Darren?
Well, you can get them to fill out an 853.
We try.
Okay, well, that's good. If you can do that. I have a shorter instrument that doesn't go that deep into it. But yeah, the first issue I always have when I'm going to talk now principally about software as a service, okay? So I'm not talking in terms of the contracts and projects that come to me. We can talk a little bit. We will talk about platform and infrastructure as a service in a bit, but I get on university and hospital health system side, I get a cloud application about every couple of weeks to look at, review, check their security. And the first thing, of course, I do is I try to find the infrastructure, okay? Because a lot of software as a service firms don't host the data themselves. They don't use a sort of classical ASP model. They put it on Amazon or Rackspace or something like that. And that changes the dynamics because outside the government here, I don't know of anybody. If you have a BAA with Amazon, raise your hand. Okay, I've never been able to get one. If you've got one, you will be the most popular security person. Everyone will be calling you. You'll have to change your phone number. So you have Adam talking about, well, it could be a conduit or it may not be a conduit. That's just confusing, and it confuses everyone, and you're supposed to say, well, okay, well, I don't know. But you would like to be able to reach back to the infrastructure, right? Like to be able to reach back to that because you don't know exactly what, a lot of the, it's not as if Amazon doesn't get people try to hack into Amazon, right? All right, it's not as if these people, and do you get their IDS, IPS logs? No. Do you get to see what's going on in terms of maybe you've got a threat in your environment that maybe you think is directed at you and you can't see it? So in addition to you no longer have sort of a neck to strangle. You don't have any information that you get. So I don't know. That one always gets me. I don't know what to do about it. And so one of the things is people are looking at encrypted compartments and all that. And I think that's really interesting, and I think we're going to see a lot of progress there. And then that just moves the potato over to key management. And as hard as it is to try to get them to explain what they do for change management, the key management, will be sort of a battle of rocket science. And most organizations just not in a position to fight with a software company over how they manage keys or their encrypted compartment on Amazon. It's just a really hard problem to solve. So is that one or two?
We'll call that one.
Okay. And the other one that gets me, and maybe it doesn't get you, but is identity, okay? Because a lot of these cloud services use your email address as your identity. Whereas in your organization, you probably have an Active Directory or something like that identity that may be the same as your email address in the sense that may be the first part of your email address, but may not be your only alias and those types of things. I mean, if you send me an email, you're going to send it to dll@jhu.edu. That's not my Jedler, that's just my alias that I think is cute because I like digitally linked libraries. And so that identity is actually a problem because a lot of these are built around a consumer model where the email is the easiest way to establish a user identity, your Gmail account, your Yahoo account. And this actually is a big issue. It comes up a lot. And and many of you have web single sign-on, we have web single sign-on, and how to establish user identity who are going to be using these things always trips us up. It trips us up for all kinds of applications, but on the cloud, it's even harder because it's off-prem.
Thank you. Well, so we've heard about the challenges that have oftentimes precluded you from using the cloud, but to the extent that you actually have been able to, and maybe the answer is you haven't, but to the extent that you have been able to actually use some cloud computing services, could you tell me about the due diligence process that each of your organization does so that you feel comfortable moving your information to the cloud? So Darren, I'll first have you answer this question.
I'd like to say I send out commandos to check their infrastructure, but it's the same thing you do with with a lot of your vendors. I mean, they have a vendor. So, for example, it's not that different than when their whole vendor, the vendor support model is all the programmers are in Romania. Okay, you know that the Romanian people are going to check. They're going to log in to support the application. So it's not that different. The risk model isn't all that different from at least my perspective. So it's a little tricky, but I do want to mention that we do have a lot of cloud-based services that people are pushing through right now, and I just figured this is off topic, but I figured I would just say, why? Why do people like cloud-based services so much? Anybody have an idea? It's not just that they're cheap. They're quick. They iterate fast. But the best part of it is they can lock IT out. Right? I mean, I'm a department. I enter into an agreement, I mean, and it's essentially there's no client, there's nothing. I can lock IT out of it completely. And the only person in IT who gets to see it is me. And then I get to gripe about how you didn't handle identity. So, I mean, part of this is essentially, you lay out the cliches about work with your customers and all those types of things. But at the end of the day, they're just going to try to do this because it's easy and they don't need IT, and IT is often for good reason, an inhibitor of ideas that people want to essentially put into place. So until you actually get, I feel like I have to, when I look at this, I have to say, are they doing this because they hate IT this much? And is there an IT solution that might work as an alternative before I say no? And before I even get to due diligence, that's the first question I ask.
And Jennings, what about you? What kind of due diligence does your organization look at before accepting someone as a cloud solution?
So I mentioned earlier the NIST 853 series, and what we try to do is we've pulled together kind of a homegrown little survey, if you will, that we ask cloud vendors to complete and document their controls and the families that are described in that document. We also have leveraged some guidance from the Cloud Security Alliance in terms of, here's a checklist of things to look at. And truthfully, it hasn't, most vendors don't meet the bar. Where we have had limited cloud deployments, and I'm not talking about ASP, but cloud deployments, there's been some work with one of our procurement teams in terms of contract management and having some of that in the cloud. We've been able to kind of steer them through this evaluation process, assessing the control frameworks that are in place and making sure they kind of align with our expectations. But the reality is most vendors cloud vendors balk when we ask them to go into this level of diligence. So it becomes kind of, that and the BA thing just become kind of, roadblocks that it doesn't lead to too much. I will say that we are pretty close, though, to making some inroads into the platform and infrastructure as a service. Some of the vendors in that space seem a lot more willing to be transparent about their control models. But when you start talking about the application level, absolutely not. The vendors really typically just don't want to, open the black box. So.
Which one gets you? I mean, of all the controls that you have, I mean, that, and some of them you're going to let, 850 is very long, you're let some of them slide. Which one of the ones that is most dear to you actually gets most of your vendors in terms of they just can't meet that bar?
It's typically around e-discovery, litigation, and just helping us with incident response. I actually typically find that the vendors want to be, they typically tend to be kind of a true black box, and we'll tell you when we think you need to know about an incident. And that to me isn't sufficient. I think from our organization's perspective, we like to know as early on about a potential incident and even, potential incidents over time so we can get a sense of what's the real security posture here of this cloud vendor. And when I go in and say, they'll only tell us if they think there's a breach. And that to me, I don't want them making that determination. I think it's a determination that my office makes with counsel and other stakeholders. We will determine if there's a breach. And that to me is a real sticking point.
Yeah, what I do is I'd say, give me a log. I want a couple different logs. I want a user access log, tell me, and then also just show me how you log, what you're logging to even determine whether you've been hacked. And they're like, well, what? No one's ever asked for a log before. And I said, no, just give me one. Any old log, you can mark out all the IP addresses and anything you want. I just want to see the structure of it. And they're just completely, flat-doodled by the possibility that somebody would actually care about looking at their logs. And but I do this for the infrastructure and platform as a service too, which is, give me your logs, give me your pen tests. And then I have the usual questionnaire stuff that I keep around just because it looks good in the contract. But if I can get those things, they're on my happy list. But few of them make it to my happy list.
How important is an independent assessment? Do you look for particular independent certifications? Is it enough to know that they've gone through it, or do you need to see the results? Or do you consider that those are, don't get you where you need to be, so they're not very important to your process?
I guess I'll tackle that first. I would say independent validation is something that's very critical, and if we're talking about software as a service, we want to see if in fact they're actually doing application testing, both static and dynamic, and whether or not they have some sort of independent third-party penetration tests. Also, obviously, we want to look at those certifications like the SAS 70s and its successor. But the reality is also, and this goes to your point earlier, Darren, a lot of these companies don't want to be transparent about this either, and they'll tell you that they do application testing, and if you ask for a copy of a de-identified, so to speak, test result, they won't provide that to you. They'll actually just keep talking and things keep circling, but you never get to any kind of answer.
Yeah, they pretty much have to have some kind of certification, like SSAE or something like that, just to fill in the box. But I don't put a lot of faith in it. It's like, okay, fine. Most of the stuff is pretty easy from an infrastructure side. Oftentimes they're extending what they get from Amazon. Now, let me say one thing. I use a different standard. If it's somebody doing a cloud service for essentially, Doodle or something, then that's going to have a different model than essentially a departmental system. So I look at it differently, but I do expect everybody to be able to reach to some kind of certification. But I really like pen tests, and I usually get terrible results on that one, but I'm trying to, and I want everyone in this room, when you get one, ask for a pen test. I want to create this as the de facto for all us CISOs in the room. Ask for pen tests to make them do it and make us give results. I could be wrong. You say, well, no, Lacey's wrong. I think it's a stupid idea. But if you kind of think it's an okay idea, if everybody's asking for it, then the next time I talk to him, I'll say, yeah, I was in Boston and everybody is asking for pen tests. And that's what I plan to do next week. So nod your head, yes. Very good, thank you.
So I have a question for you. Why would you treat Doodle differently than an administrative system? And let me just explain our perspective. You know, something like Doodle, there's this discretionary element where some clinician may type, patient data in the little poll or survey. So I just assume the worst of my users or individuals in the organization. And there's someone from my organization here. Please do not report that back home. But yes, I'm looking at you. But it's true. I mean, there's discretion. People do silly things, or you may call them stupid things, and that's not judgmental because I do stupid things too. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. Now remember, I get both university stuff and hospital health system stuff. So and on the university side, in terms of student systems that serve students. Almost every application that they run, except for our principal student system, our main kind of like an EMR for students, is off-prem. They're all cloud-based, software as a service. I mean, Blackboard and other. I mean, it's just one right after another. And so I review those too. So I apply a different standard. It gets weird because you're right. I mean, where this is most interesting is in business intelligence, which you can kind of see. Well, you can see all that being de-identified. There may be, critical proprietary business information in the sense of financial stuff, but it doesn't, it's not like employee data on the one hand. And then you also have, on the other hand, you have collaboration tools. Everybody likes those. Box and Dropbox are examples, kind of collaboration tools. And if it's a collaboration tool, you pretty much expect somebody somewhere along the line is going to put, some PHI in it. So I have a jaundiced view of that too. But if you can keep it small and you can keep it under control and you get the department that's going out and buying them to essentially make a vow in blood to essentially get information back from them routinely, I will on occasion give those a pass. The thing is that if we kill every cloud service, we're going to have issues, and so we have to. So I am a little bit risk tolerant in this area. So anybody from OCR or whatever, forget I said.
I haven't seen any yet.
Okay, but now I am a little bit risk tolerant there because I'm trying to create a discipline where we can actually manage cloud services appropriately. And if that means a few things slip under the belt as we're working through it, I can live with that.
So we have a question from the audience.
So you mentioned the Cloud Security Alliance. I was curious, a couple questions. One is, have you guys come across, or do you use, or do your vendors use the shared assessment like through the Santa Fe group, which is a pretty standardized sort of industry recognized questionnaire? And also, with regard to ISO 27001 and 2, does that provide you any validation, or it is, I guess, in essence, just another certification, but it does have a fairly strong, backbone of security controls and such. So I just wonder what you have to say about those two.
It's all good on both. If they give me a shared assessment, I'll take it. If they say, I don't want to fill out your form, I want to fill out the shared assessment instead, I'll take it and attach it to the contract. That's fine. It would be great if we all use the shared assessment. Right. We have to add a few questions.
Yeah, no, that's what I was basically asking, because I think, when done correctly, it's as good as anything you're going to get or anything that, a covered entity is going to give you. So that's why I was curious.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that, as an organization, we're very interested in the ISO framework. I just tend to view that, though, more around the administration of a program, if you will, not at the kind of technical level that I want to see for application security, which is why we've really built on the NIST 800 series. So this is the security nerd conversation.
Yes, sir.
The breach you were initially talking about, I think, is Phoenix.
Phoenix cardiac surgery.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe you can make a distinction between getting cloud services from an HIS vendor, which there's more of that, and then are you differentiating the prejudice or the jokes in one or the other to the hosting.coms? We're limiting those that really don't understand the business we're in, right? And then there's that do understand the business we're in. And there is a difference. The posture is different. The acceptance is different. I know a lot of practice management systems are cloud-based. I mean, it's very common. You know, there's a lot of support for that. What, you know, are you making those distinctions internally? You trust one equally over the other, you know, those types of things?
No, I think, you know, I'd be skeptical of any vendor. I mean, I can't say that we do this perfectly, but, and this goes back to, you know, the concept of even the traditional ASP vendor, the evaluations that we should be doing, and we don't always do as well as we should, for ASP vendors should apply across any sort of cloud vendor, regardless of the fact they may service the healthcare vertical, or they may just be a general cloud SaaS provider. It just, due diligence is the right thing to do across the board from my perspective.
That being said, if they misspell HIPAA, that might be a little bit of a warning sign. If they look at you like you've got two heads when you mention the word HIPAA, probably want to run.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So how important is geography in your equation? I mean, do you only, you know, do you ask, and if so, it has to be in the US? Are there some countries that it's acceptable, others not? How does that go through? Jennings?
It is important right now. I'm thinking of the current version of our survey tool. We explicitly state we won't agree to hosting outside of the United States. And actually, the concern I have historically isn't really from the cloud security issues. It's actually going back to the transcription security issues and looking at like what the VA went through back in 2000, I think it was 3, with outsourcing transcription to countries in Southeast Asia and having people try to hold them hostage. It's just pretty clear there are certain countries where security is just not it's non-existent, and your ability to deal with that. You don't want to be hosting things in Brazil, as an example. So, no offense against Brazil, but there's no extradition. It is what it is. So, I just simply have tried to steer my organization to relying on United States-based and requiring that in the contracts.
Darren, what about you?
Yeah, ditto, essentially. Yeah, not that much different.
Okay, so I have more questions, but I do want to give more people in the audience an opportunity in the time we have remaining. So do we have any other questions from the audience before I continue? Okay, hearing none, so you touched a bit on subcontractors and the whole software as a service versus infrastructure as a service underneath maybe a different provider. Have you ever been able to reach a point where you've got multiple cloud providers, but it's okay, you've been satisfied with them, or has that just never worked out so far?
I think in general it hasn't worked out. And one thing I want to make clear too is that, I can't claim that my organization actually really knows what it's doing in this space. So I don't want to come up here like I'm pontificating or something, but where we've had breakdowns, and this is like the whole BA issue I mentioned earlier, in the course of negotiations, we talked to the vendor, and some of them are willing to sign BAs, but then their subs aren't. And the subs are saying, we're not a business associate, and we don't have those obligations, and things break down there. So, from our perspective, it's an important thing to make sure that the subcontractors are they have skin in the game, so to speak. And I can't say that we've really, in situations where there's been multiple vendors, been satisfied.
Darren?
I think that I'm going to go, if they encrypt the compartment, it depends on how the keys are done. Because I'm kind of assuming they're on Amazon or Rackspace at that point. If they put everything in an encrypted compartment, and what's fun about this is that we all as security people, security nerds, can sit and argue about how secure that really is, and that is fun. But I don't really see a choice in the matter ultimately. Amazon is awesome. They have EC2 and S3 are great. Rackspace is great. It's a great infrastructure to build applications on. All right, so to say, well, that there's just no way short of Amazon signing a BAA with everybody on earth that we're going to let them in, I just don't think that's going to work in the medium or long term. It's conceivable that there'll be an Amazon essentially alternative out there that will be just as good and also sign BAAs with everyone, but I'm not betting on it. So, one of the things I'd like to see from the security community is to disabuse me of my reckless willingness to sign agreements with or to say, yeah, okay, well, that makes sense, and here's kind of the expectations we have with respect to key management and those types of things. But I'm going to say right now that I would and have approved agreements where they had PHI and they were in an encrypted compartment.
Yes, sir.
I'm struggling with the overall theme of this. If you like cloud, if you hate it, if it's, you know, I think we got to really think of the business needs. And when you're trying to move, when you get into large amounts of data, moving that around is very difficult. If certain functions are, you know, remotely managed or it's all hosted off-premise. There's a lot of good use cases, you know, one over the other. And I think a lot of that has to be taken into account. And I'm sure it is in your analysis, how much data is involved, you know, where the compute has to happen next to the data. When you start examining things like what Amazon can offer, can it scale, you know, where are we going, you know, with the economies of scale and whatnot. Do you have any difference with a hybrid implementation? You have something local, and then you'll marry that with something off-premise.
So I guess I'd first like to just comment, why can't we be conflicted? Why does life have to be reduced to binaries? I think as human beings, we traffic in conflict. So that being said, I think ultimately that is going to be the approach for a lot of organizations in healthcare, is to look at hybrid scenarios, or to Darren's point, you know, having encrypted containers, or you know, one of the issues you may have as an example is like the logging stinks with the infrastructure as a provider. So you build the logging into the application that you're running in their infrastructure. So I think that's going to be the approach that ultimately has to, that will ultimately lead healthcare to actually embrace the cloud, is to not think of it in terms of a monolithic binary approach, but to embrace, you know, more complex architectures to allow us to compartmentalize risk.
So I think we'll do these as the last two questions. Yes, sir?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
As a vendor who relies on Amazon for hosting, can I rest on their certification laurels, you know, their SaaS and all FIPS and I don't know what else, and basically sell that to my customers and say, because it's on that infrastructure, it's certified?
So are we negotiating a contract now? Okay, no, the answer is no, you can't do any of that. No, of course, actually that matters. I mean, the fact that Amazon has some very well documented, you know, all kinds of documentation about this is consequential in the discussion. But there's still not a neck I can strangle. And that's kind of what I'm looking for, not to put a too fine a point on it. So you have to have a good story to tell about, you know, what you're going to do with Amazon along the way. And right now, my story is encryption, and it may be something very different a year from now. I mean, this is changing so fast that, you know, putting us up here as cloud experts is kind of silly. I mean, you know, but, you know.
You're the ones who said yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Could you also comment on data loss? Because none of the providers, Amazon or anyone else, will ever guarantee, you know, against data loss, or it's not in their contract, it's not in their SLA. The only thing you can get is a, you know, refund for the amount of time they're down. Right. So you know, you could lose everything on Amazon. It could be encrypted, but you could lose it, and Amazon has no skin in the game.
Then we won't use them, I guess.
Every provider is like that.
What do you mean by lose, though? I mean, you know, lose is a, you know, in our little business, lose is a pretty ambiguous term. So, I mean,
in IT, it's very easy, right? There's information and then there's no information. So.
Oh, you mean it's gone?
Yeah.
You mean that one day it's there and the next day it's gone? Not that it's
They
been
can't find it?
compromised. It's that we can't find it anymore.
Well, you know, the infrastructure lost a drive.
Right.
Happens
I see
all
what
the
you're
time.
saying. Yeah, well, that's a model, and I think it's one of the things we've got to be able to do is and I think this is one of the reasons why hybrid clouds are going to do well, because you're going to be able to move a lot of that data to where it's in a nice, warm, cozy place that you have, you know, near 100% certainty that you'll be able to find somewhere along the way. Yeah, and I wouldn't put my EMR in Amazon right now. But there's a lot of things I would put on Amazon, that I'm not as worried about losing it like you're in your discussion.
Okay, so one last question in the back.
I'm also a vendor. We do encrypted compartment. And I'm curious, with your experience evaluating vendors, whether you've in the course of your evaluations, if you've run across vendors that have gone that extra mile, but charge a lot more as a result. Because one of the challenges, of course, is, we've looked at BAA-friendly hosting, Firehose, Verizon, still continue to evaluate things like that. But folks not only like the convenience of consumer-grade apps, they also like the pricing of consumer-grade apps. And, it's challenging selling into healthcare, as we all know, financially as well.
To be perfectly frank, we haven't had a situation where a vendor came back and said, we will agree to something, but we'll charge you more. It's just typically been, they have no interest in meeting the requirements in any way. They're not trying to be creative in solving the problem. And I think you're right. If we came back with a much higher price point, the business that's looking for the cloud computing would just say, forget it. We're just going to go underground and just do it without you paying attention to it. So.
My response is that the compartment would have to, essentially for it to, I would expect them to do encrypted compartments for lots of people, not just us, and to sort of leverage that across multiple customers. And so my expectation is it wouldn't increase the price very much, although it might have some marginal impact initially. But I'm willing to live with that.
Well, thank you both for, I think, a great discussion on this very challenging, not at all black and white issue. So thank you.
We can take a short break. I just want to, it's scheduled for 15, but I'd like to keep it to 10.